Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. In this episode, we'll discuss how to craft a compelling product pitch, how to measure its success, the difference between marketing and sales, the impact of cognitive biases on consumer decision-making, overcoming the fear of selling, and the importance of authenticity in building trust. So if you're in marketing, sales, design, or product management, or simply interested in understanding how consumer psychology influences our daily choices, you're in the right place. As always, you can expect an honest conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today, I'm joined by a marketing leader, public speaker, and consumer psychology enthusiast. He's the founder of Find Your Audience and has over 10 years of experience in B2B marketing. He worked with top Canadian companies like Constellation Software and Procom and was engaged by Shark Tank's Robert Herjavec. With 18 years of SEO experience and 9+ years as a performance digital media buyer, he drove growth for over 50 clients in the B2B SaaS space. He has also been a guest lecturer at UC Berkeley and St. John's University. Fun facts about our guest: he was once a professional Counter-Strike player before gaming was popular enough to make a full-time salary. He's also an absolute health geek and works out twice a day, every day. Without further ado, let's welcome Nathan Yeung to the Product People podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited about today's podcast.
Before we get started, I'd love to hear a bit more on your story and how you got into product marketing and your interest in this intersection of psychology and marketing.
So my background is a little bit different in the sense that I went to school for marketing, but my first job was actually a VP of finance. And I was very, very privileged and lucky to get that job. I did not get that through any traditional means. And that kind of put me on the path to work at a very senior level in a lot of companies at a very young age. So after I was a VP of finance, I was an operational consultant for some angel investors, where I was essentially working with the companies on a management level, assisting them with operations, but also integration strategy. So a lot of these companies were buying companies and rolling them in. And through all this journeys of, being in C-suite, being very young, being a sponge, I had the opportunity to learn about marketing across multiple companies in a lens that I don't think a lot of people would have had at a younger age. And the one thing I recognized was, out of all the functions in a business, I felt like marketing was actually the most difficult, in the sense that while there are certainly some well-known frameworks for people to approach marketing, there was not really one single framework that worked for every single company. And you really had to be really in tune with your market, in tune with your business, in tune with your operations to generate a framework that actually worked. Most companies don't actually have that. I felt like most companies have a very reactive function, which means, sure, marketing might be producing some results, but the reality is it's not nearly producing it as much as a company that has a very mature marketing function. And I don't think people appreciate how much effort it takes for a function to get to that mature level. And so when I was now finally a COO of an ad technology company and then I left, I essentially started this company because I had lots of friends who are, startup founders. I had a lot of companies and friends that were VC backed, and I would listen to the marketing advice they get and I would just be dumbfounded. I would be confused. I'd hear these outrageous claims and outrageous ideas, and a lot of these marketing ideas, sure, on paper sounded great, but on an executional perspective, completely missed the mark. Because I felt like a lot of times when I was on the finance and operations side, marketing sometimes tried to be in a silo, but the reality, it's not in a silo. Marketing impacts a lot on the business, whether that impacts the finance side, aka money, whether it impacts the operational side, the MAR stack, whether it impacts the technology side, the data analytics, data enrichment side, the product side. It impacts every part of the business. And sometimes when they run in a silo, they don't think about how much impact happens when they come up with a campaign or come up with an idea or a feature that they want to push. And that got me frustrated. So essentially what ended up happening was I was just like, stop paying your marketing firms. I'm going to do this for you. And I just kind of recognized that a lot of companies needed that strategy perspective before they really started going to tactics, which sounds simple, but a lot of founders, a lot of business owners were kind of impatient. So they jump right into tactics and they start recognizing, 3 to 6 months down the road, those tactics aren't working because they never really had a great strategy in place. And when they didn't get a great strategy in place, they've now just wasted 6 months, and they recognize it's going to take them another 3 to 6 months for them to start seeing results. So I wanted just to stop my friends spending really bad money. And that was kind of how I got into marketing and product marketing, and really, really making sure that people had a prudent approach to the investments they're going to put into when it came to tactics. And that's how I got into the business. And now it's grown. I've been in business now for 7.5 years, and I've worked from some amazing clients. One of the largest clients we work with is Constellation Software. And for those that don't know, they have 300 plus clients, and it's crazy. It's crazy working for them. They're an amazing organization. And I've gotten to work with some amazing people, like doing Robert Herjavic's website. So I am truly privileged and truly lucky to be in this position.
Thanks for sharing. I wanted to get into this debate, but not too much into it, and just wanted to get your perspective on marketing versus sales. What's your take on the difference between marketing and sales?
That's a great question. I think with the advent of more new technology that's coming out, it's starting to get very blended. And I think that's also where you're starting to see CRO roles come in. And, in my opinion, a CRO role is a blend between both marketing and sales. If you were to force me to put straight responsibility lanes and to identify what's the difference between marketing and sales, sales to me is the human interaction that is required between a potential customer, potential lead, a qualified lead, whatever acronym you want to give them. And marketing is everything around that. So in essence, to a certain extent, I'm also even indicating that the emails that the salespeople use fall within the marketing realm, because that's not necessarily an actual human interaction. My expectation is that sales is always the human element between getting a lead to a qualified status and getting that qualified status to hopefully a close. So anything to do with demo presentations, taking calls, servicing them to a certain extent, that's what I expect to be sales.
Getting into today's topic, I want to start by level setting on definitions. So what is a product pitch, and why should product people care about crafting and presenting one?
I've recognized in any business, if you try to push anything within any organization, you have to get buy-in. And, everyone knows what an investor pitch is, and a product pitch is no different. If you're on the product team and you've identified white space, which means I've looked at the competitor set, I've looked at what everyone else is doing, and I know for a fact there is a pain point in the market that no one is addressing, or certainly is addressing poorly, and that that there's a ton of uptake for that, you have to create a product pitch. And that's just simply a very concise presentation that highlights the key features, benefits, and ultimately the unique value that, that feature or product is delivering to those customers or stakeholders. And it's really, really important, because if you don't convey that story well, you're of course not going to get the buy-in from your C-suite. And if you don't have buy-in from your C-suite, whatever you're putting into your roadmap, whatever you're trying to do, is not going to get a ton of support, which means, just on your own pure performance perspective, you're not going to get the support you need to succeed. And if you don't get the support you need to succeed, you're not going to perform well. So I think, like everything in marketing, especially, our job is to make something complex into something simple and consumable. If you want to get buy-in, you're going to have to take that idea, that opportunity you've identified, and make that simple enough for someone to consume.
It's a great way to put it. You spoke about this outcome. You spoke about how the ultimate outcome is buy-in from your audience, whether they're investors, stakeholders, etc. So how can you tell, if you're the one putting a product pitch together, presenting it, how can you tell if it was a success? How do you measure the success of a product pitch?
I think that's a great question. I think when it comes to a product pitch and the success, there's a couple of key things you can definitely look for. If you've ever done a product pitch, or you've done any pitches, I'm sure you can tell when you've lost the room. So obviously, just human behavior, human interaction is going to be a huge thing for you. I know that's not a quantitative factor that you can, put on paper, but it's certainly a qualitative thing that's really important. You want to be looking for signs for disengagement. You need to be able to read the room, because if you're talking about a pain point that supposedly, whoever you're talking to is likely a subject matter expert, an SME, you should really be seeing whether or not they're also agreeing with that opinion. Now, that all being said, whoever you're pitching may or may not be the perfect ideal customer profile, right? So I'm saying this with some reservations. It's not a perfect thing, but certainly being able to read the room is really important. And having the people listening to your presentation be able to reiterate concisely the problem and solution back to you is also really important, because if they're unable to verbalize the pain point you are trying to fix, then you know that your pitch is not done well. It means your pitch is too complex. And if you can't have someone repeat that to you, then you really need to rethink whether or not you've done a good enough job kind of dumbing down, for lack of better words, your pitch, because it needs to be simple. This comes back to my topic about consumer psychology and a lot of the things that I've been learning. And the reality is we're all lazy and we're lazy in the sense that we want to conserve energy. And you have to really respect the people across the table likely fall under this category as well. So if you know that they're lazy, meaning you have to spoon feed this as much as possible to them, then you need to really dive down into your presentation and make sure it is as simple as possible. Can a fifth grader understand it? And can a fifth grader understand the impact and influence and positive solutions that you're providing? And if you can't, then you're going to see it. You're going to see it. The other thing that's also really important is the amount of questions they ask at the end. I find that typically clients that do not ask any questions at the end is not necessarily a good thing. I think a lot of people feel like at the end of the presentation, if there's no questions, it means you did a good job, but that could also be a sign of pure disengagement. So for me, typically anyone that has questions at the end and continues to ask detailed questions is typically a person who's actually more interested.
Well, you mentioned on how you measure the success of a product pitch. You spoke about engagement and science around how you read a room and keeping people engaged. Testing via a playback understanding, that's how I put your second point. So confirming that the audience understood your product pitch, the opportunity, the key feature, the benefits, the problem you're trying to solve, the pain points that you went through, confirming that in their own words and having them play that back to you. And then the third one, it was more around the questions volume. Maybe this is a after the fact test for engagement as well, with knowing that the more engaged they are, the higher the probability that they will be asking questions. And then I guess I'll add one, and it's mostly around your CTA. I think that would be important. What is that call to action? And did they act up on it, or did they agree to your ask? I think that would be my addition to your list.
Yeah, sorry. I think I skipped over the most obvious one, which is you're absolutely correct. Like, what is the ask? Whether that's a follow-up meeting, whether that's funds. Usually, of course, yes, a product pitch would have an outcome, and you're absolutely correct.
So from your experience, you've seen a lot of product pitches, and I'd love to hear stories that you can share with our audience around maybe the best product pitch that you've seen. Why do you think it was great? And perhaps the worst product pitch that you've seen and how it could have been better.
I think the best product pitch I've seen are usually the ones actually in person. And I think that's because when you do product pitches in person, there's an element where you can bring props, and that really adds to the concreteness of the problem that you're typically solving. And for the product pitch on this one was a consumer-based product, and I won't name it, but they were trying to solve just a household problem. And while it's certainly easy for anyone to listen to that, it's always better to be able to demonstrate and to bring in a faux demo. And if you think about this, is true for every landing page or website, anything where you can demonstrate the observable performance of whatever you are doing and how it impacts that pain point in real life or in real time is a very, very powerful product pitch. So I can't tell you the exact best one, but I can certainly tell you all of the ones that I have ever seen and has made an impact are the ones that demonstrate it just in real life. If they can demonstrate that in real time, that is the best product pitch you can do. And in fact, you see this even on the shopping channel. There's great examples of great product pitches where it's literally 300 different angles of the same performance of a specific feature of a product being shown to viewers. I think that's a beautiful product pitch. And I hate to say it, Stick It was a great product. Because they were able to pitch it so well to the audience. And I think that's a great testament to their marketing team. So I can't put to you one exact pitch to me that ever stands out, but all of the ones that ever have, it's just the one that demonstrate very well. The worst pitch stories that I have to say are just the ones that just get too darn technical. And there's a lot of times you'll listen to entrepreneurs or garage founders that are building something and they go into technical things and they don't validate the pain point. And I think the best pitch that I've seen was for a keyboard. And it was a keyboard that was supposedly, it was a keyboard that you attach via USB, so it's not a wireless one, but it was the fastest signal that you could send to a computer. And while I thought the scientific reasons as to how he developed it, etc., was super interesting, the point of the whole thing was like, well, why does that even matter? It's like you as a founder made a product that performs better based on the comps in the market. But is that a feature that actually solves a pain point any better? And it didn't. And I think the worst pitch is when you see the founder just deny the facts of, can someone actually recognize that performance? Can someone actually appreciate that value that you've generated by this new technical thing that you've created? And watching a founder continue to go down this path of, well, it's better, it's faster, it's stronger, but not be able to say is, can anyone actually notice the difference? And him fumble and just skirt the question is the worst pitch you can ever see. And it is really sad because I respect every founder that I've ever met. I respect every product person I've ever met because I know for a fact that they are smarter than me in something. But I think what they end up forgetting, or what a lot of entrepreneurs forget, is just because you have developed something that performs better, that's important. But what's really important is the audience, the people that are ultimately consuming that product. Will they appreciate that performance?
You mentioned a lot of great points. I really like your point about concreteness and seeing someone solve a problem in action. And I think that's a great takeaway. Now, on the common pitfalls side, you spoke about two things. One is you said, and I'll quote you, too darn technical, being very technical, getting into a lot of details. But also you said something around not validating or not testing the pain point and focusing on the problem you're trying to solve. It's kind of this classic example of falling in love with a solution rather than falling in love with a problem and being, in a way, seduced by a solution that you're passionate about. And I think it's a great segue for me to also get into that psychology aspect, which I know you're very passionate about. So I want to understand from you, how is it for product people developing or looking to develop their understanding in psychology? How does that help, especially with their audience? And how does it play a role in successful product marketing? And does it really differ if you're dealing with a psychology of an individual when you're marketing B2C versus B2B?
There are so many things that play a role, but I'll focus on some key aspects. I think the one thing that I'll say is people do not like making decisions of which they are not informed enough to make. And sometimes we're forced to make decisions when we're not fully informed, because the reality is, again, going back to the consumer psychology of it, we're inherently lazy, but we're also sometimes just resource capped. And a great example is when any company goes through a procurement exercise, those procurement exercises typically can last a couple weeks to get this done tomorrow. And when they're going through that procurement exercise, you have to recognize there's an individual, a potential consumer who may not be the actual end user, who is assessing your product and needs to assess some technical jargon they may or may not be able to actually understand themselves. So they will rely on your materials in order to validate the contextual value of your product versus other competitors. This is why I tell a lot of companies, you have to be first in their mind. You have to be the most accessible brand in their mind, because it fundamentally changes how people compare products. The example I tend to give is cars, for someone who doesn't know any cars. So when you choose the car you want, you go onto their website, you look at the features, you look at the trim, you look at the type of leather, you look at the powertrain, you look at the horsepower, whatever that first car is that comes to mind is the car that their feature list is going to become the baseline of which they measure against every other car. So if for whatever reason one company decides to go into massive detail about their sound system and how they're using XYZ and how it's different, it's differentiated, and it has all these new widgets, they're going to look for that in their competitor product, whether or not it actually provides a performance bonus, because they have a limited time to make a decision. Now, the car might not be the best example, but let's just assume you have to buy a car in a week. They're going to assume that these features are important to them, and then they will measure that against all of their competitors. So you can see the power of what happens when you're first. You get to set the playing field. So how this all ties into consumer psychology is because we will rationalize things whether or not we can actually understand it to a level of expertise that would be considered an expert, because we just don't have the time. So we will take information, we will use heuristics, which are mental shortcuts, and we will simply make judgment calls. And this ultimately is actually being done because, as I've mentioned right at the beginning, I said people do not like making decisions if they're not informed. So we will kind of truthfully lie to ourselves and say that we are informed. And then what we will do is we will make informed decisions based on information of which we may or may not have actually validated, but has now framed it in such a way where we feel more comfortable. Now, I've gone through some really detailed things. I'm going to make a more simple analogy because this comes down to pricing, and this would be a nice one. Mm-hmm. So if for whatever reason, for anyone that's listening who has a partner or a spouse, sometimes, they'll nag you for weeks to buy something. And finally they get to the point where you got to do this today. So you got 4 hours to go purchase whatever this is. When you go rush to that store and they only have one option, you typically don't feel good if you're forced to buy that option. You'll feel a lot better if at least they have 3 other performance versions of that option at 3 different price points. Because even though it's the same product at 3 different price points, and the price point is the only thing that you're actually making the judgment call on now, you feel like you're in control of that decision, which means you're making an informed one, which means you feel better when you buy it and you take it home. If there was only one choice, you actually don't feel good. Why? Because you feel like you weren't informed, because you were not able to make a choice. You were forced to make a choice. So this is where consumer psychology and framing and making sure that the customer feels like they're in control is actually really, really important, because this ultimately leads to their experience. And if you care about your customer experience and also note that a lot of companies grow on, what they consider revenue expansion of current clients, then you need to be very aware that you actually should care about this, because the better the experience, the more likely they will share their experience, the more likely you're going to have network effects. So a couple key points that just takeaways here, right? So, one, framing and price anchoring plays a huge role, not only in helping guide your consumers into making decisions, but your consumers are lazy. They will use heuristics. And that's why branding and branding type activities are so important, so that you stay top of mind, being accessible, because that means you get to set the playing field, which means the competitors are competing with you, not you competing with your competitors.
Mm-hmm. I really like your point about anchoring and how it affects our satisfaction with consumer decisions that we make. I guess on the other side, it's the opposite. It's too many choices, or you get that choice overload. On that side, it's not good either, because then it may lead to indecision or just lower satisfaction when you make a choice. When you get 24 options of jam or cereal, that becomes very difficult to choose. So I guess that's the balance that we need to hit in the process as well.
Absolutely. And that's why you'll see a lot of companies follow that rule of 3 when it comes to pricing, which has been really much time tested. There are some other studies that say it's up to 7, but I would highly recommend not to do 7. The reality is that 3 is enough for someone to consume and consume quickly. Anything more than that, you typically get a little bit confused, and your body will start essentially going, we're consuming too much energy here. Let's kind of glaze over the backs. I think the other point you mentioned was, what's the biggest difference between B2B and B2C? When it comes to consumer psychology, there's one thing that I'll say plays the biggest difference in B2B and B2C, and it's called the observability effect. The observability effect, and I just did this at a conference in Niagara-on-the-Lake to 100 different SaaS CEOs. I said to them, everyone put up your hand if you can name your friends or your friends' ERP system. And I think one person named it. And I said, okay, put up your hands on if you can name one shoe brand that your friend has. And everyone obviously was naming a whole bunch of brands. And what's really, which this is a fundamental difference between B2B and B2C, is very rarely in B2B are B2B companies offered the ability to have observability in their product. And observability to me is not just observability of the features, meaning like, can I see that this B2B product actually performs well? You can do that. What I'm talking about is public observability, essentially free advertising, right? And why this is so important is because this plays a lot with social proof, and social proof plays a huge role in influencing our decisions. So the biggest handicap that B2B has that B2C has is the fact that they don't get free observability. And that is actually incredibly important, and far more important than anyone thinks, because, I am sure that if you knew that the three largest of your competitors are using XYZ vendors, you are probably going to use that vendor. But the thing is that also B2B, most businesses are inherently reluctant to actually really share any of their vendors or things that they're using because they consider it a part of their secret sauce. In B2C, you wear your shoes in public, you wear your, headphones in public, you wear your clothes in public. Everyone can see what you are wearing. That observability plays a massive role in uptake because it plays a massive role in social proof, which then inherently has network effects, which then inherently influences, impacts a whole lot more people at scale than B2B ever will. So if there was one main difference, that's the main difference that I think is just drastically impacts how you need to think about marketing, which is why in B2B, it's so much harder to get traction.
When you were speaking about observability, what it reminded me of was, that line, the signature line that you would see in emails where it says sent from an iPhone or sent from an Android. I don't know who pioneered it, but I remember, there was a lot of conversations around how brilliant that was. And there was that element, I guess, of hyped observability. And I guess this is more on the B2C side, but I see your point. B2B, you don't get that as much. And the exercise or the activity that you did in the conference really shows that in action. So thank you for sharing.
And I actually know where that came from. Fairly sure that Hotmail first one to do that. Hotmail, when they first launched, every Hotmail mail that went out said powered by Hotmail or front Hotmail.
All right, we're going to take a short break. And when we're back, I'll be asking you about the discomfort that product people sometimes have with selling.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Hey there, my amazing product people. If you're trying to find your own story with product, design, and leadership, gain a new perspective on being human in a soulless corporate world, and possibly have a good laugh in the process, you can grab your very own copy of my latest book, Product People, A Journal of Laughter and Tears. It's available on Amazon in all formats right now. Happy reading. All right, let's continue where we left off. I wanted to ask you about sales. Many product people are uncomfortable with the idea of selling. What advice would you give them to overcome this feeling?
I feel like most people that are listening probably have friends. And I feel like most people who have friends likely care about their friends. And I feel like most people who care for their friends likely have conversations where they are actually selling an idea. And you're selling an idea because you're in a conversation where you feel like your friend that you care about is likely making a bad decision. I would want everyone listening to think about sales is no different than that. So if you can do that for the people around you, then you can do sales. And what I'm trying to do here is actually reframe your thinking. I think people think sales is this new skill that you've never done before, but I'm actually going to argue, no, this is a skill you already have and you already practice. The only difference is what you're actually talking about. So instead of giving your friend advice and selling them on that advice, giving them the benefits and actively listening and developing stories so that they understand you and collaborating with them to figure out maybe a better solution, you're just doing it for a product. And this will take some practice, but rather than thinking as, you're talking to salespeople and this must be different, but they're really not. They're also, if you really think about it, are people that have a problem and you're advising them. The only difference is that rather than you giving them advice, you're giving them a product that ultimately solves some of their pain points.
I love the reframing. I think a lot of that discomfort typically comes from this idea of, I just feel awkward to ask someone for their money. That's the common frame. That's the frame that people kind of fixate on sometimes. And it feels I don't know. I don't want to say it feels dirty to some people. How can I do that? How can I ask people for their money? But I love how you reframed it around consider the people that you're helping trying to solve a problem. And if your product does solve that problem for them, then you're helping them. And maybe it also comes with the responsibility to walk away or to actually tell them, you know what, my product is not going to help solve your problem if it doesn't. So I think it's exactly what you said. It's about how you frame it. And I really love how you said that this skill is something that you already have. You just don't realize it yet.
I have a saying. It's the saying that comes from every parent has said this. They always go, "You'll know when it happened." And whether that's like you going through a relationship or you just going through life or you making your first purchase or anything, parents always go, "You'll know. Trust me, like whatever I'm saying, you'll understand when it happens." It's really easy actually for all of us to quote unquote understand, but we will never believe until we feel. And you will never feel until you try.
It's a great way to put it. Speaking of what happens in the future, and if you had to make a bold prediction about B2B marketing in the next 5 years and where it's going in the future, what would that be and why?
I think the biggest bold thing that I'll say is AI is going to cause us to feel like a lot of things are not authentic. And I think that should be relatively obvious, but it'll become more and more obvious as time goes by, where we as consumers will start recognizing that we no longer know whether our product, person, content is actually coming from a real person or not. And I think authenticity is going to go a long, long way. I don't even think that's a bold prediction. I think that's just an obvious one to me. I'm going to be doing a keynote on trust and how trust plays in consumer psychology and marketing. And if you look at how trust is built, it's built on authenticity, logic, and empathy. And if we think about how we do business is fundamentally built on trust. And if we lose one pillar of communicating authenticity, that's a problem. And I really think that what's going to change in the future for B2B marketing is how are we going to demonstrate authenticity to our potential market? How are we going to demonstrate that not all of the stuff that we are producing is not being produced by a language model somewhere, whether it be Google, Meta, OpenAI, or Claude, or whichever other new company is available. And people are going to want to see non-AI generated empathy. So there's going to be this push where I think real content creation, not just distributed or cut up versions that are AI generated, I think are going to play a massive impact in the future. And I feel like we talk about this in marketing all the time. We call them like high value pieces of content, which are like white papers or research papers. I feel like what's going to shift is we're still going to have those, but now we're going to have like high value, real people pieces of content where you or someone in your organization is going to be live. And that live factor is going to start playing a bigger and bigger role because people are going to want to generate trust, and people are going to stop generating trust because they're going to lose the comfort that anything is actually authentic.
Yeah, that's very true. I really like that topic that you're going to be focusing on in your next keynote, building trust. As I was taking notes as you were speaking, I put down authenticity as a competitive advantage, where now it's going to be even more rare to have that element of authenticity when it comes to brands, but also I would imagine individuals. By time, everything is going to look the same. And I get your point on you'll stand out when you're authentic. And maybe this would be also a good opportunity for me to switch gears a little bit and get your advice on people that are just getting into product and perhaps product marketing. What advice would you give them today?
I'll give bullet points, but I feel like they're oversimplified, but they're oversimplified so that they're easy to remember. I know this is obvious, but you got to stay curious. You got to learn anything that comes as a new thing in the market. Never judge it. And take the time to understand why did it come to market. And I think that's the number one thing that I think is really, really important about product marketing is your competitors and everyone will be producing things. Rather than judging it, ask yourself, why did they do it versus judging it? It's so easy for us to go, oh, that feature is so stupid. Maybe ask your question as, well, if there was a good reason why they produced it, what is that reason? And that's what I mean by staying curious is it's very easy for all of us to assume and to make easy assumptions and to make easy judgment calls. But staying curious and going the route that's harder, which is someone did something, rather than judging it, really understand why. That's where you're going to learn far, far more. The second point is develop cross-functional skills, for lack of better words. What that really means is understand as a product person that has to intersect, obviously, product, but likely finance, likely marketing, likely sales. You're going to need to be able to communicate well across these functions, which means you yourself need to do your own marketing internally when you're talking, which means you need to understand the pain points that you're solving for these functions internally when you're communicating, and making sure that you understand the benefit and communicating that as well. And that's really important to, again, going back to that product pitch discussion, understanding your stakeholders and making sure that you're talking about it in the terms that are important to them. The finance person cares about numbers. The salesperson cares about the features, the benefits, and the pain points that we're solving for their ideal customer profiles. Your operations are going to care about it in the sense of, you come up with an idea that's impossible for you to deliver, right? And so I think understanding how a business works on a functional level is really important. I'm not, telling you to be an expert in each, but just know enough to be dangerous I think it's a saying. So I think that's really important. The third point is learn how to storytell. And I'll take this back to consumer psychology and also the trust. The reason why storytelling is so important is because it's actually disarming. And the reason why you want to disarm is because, you can argue that this might be a manipulation tactic, but then you're just telling me every single person who storytells is manipulating you, which is not true. What it really does is it forces the receiver to kind of disable their logical part of their brain and move more into the emotional side of the brain. And what actually ends up happening there, if you really think about it, is now they will feel more empathy if you're doing a good job. If they are set on a very logical perspective and you can't disarm that, they're going to just be very heavy-handed and force logic, and that's not going to do you any favors. The reason why storytelling is so important is because what you're trying to do is you're creating a framework of which they are used to understanding. It actually comes from their childhood. And that's actually why storytelling, in my personal opinion, based on my research, is why storytelling is so important. So beyond the fact that it's disarming, the reason why I feel like storytelling is the most disarming is because you're actually practicing something of comfort of which someone has received their entire life during childhood. And it's likely one of which is a positive experience for them. And that's why storytelling is so important, is because you're actually framing something in a very positive way of which subconsciously they're very used to receiving in a positive manner. And when you do all of that, typically what you are trying to sell gets a little bit more sexy because they're willing to listen, because now they're in a state of listening, because that exactly is what storytelling is. So first point, stay curious. Second point, understand a business across the function. And the third point is really learn and understand how to storytell. I have one more, which is build a network. I think it's really important. When I was going to school, I had this whole theory where, they say like that 1,000-hour rule or whatever. It's like you guys spend like 10,000 hours to become an expert or whatever that is. And while I don't think that's not far from the truth, I think it's an oversimplification. But what you can do is you can spend 1 hour with that person that has spent 10,000 hours, and you're going to gain like 5,000 hours of experience. And that's why building a network is so important, because you can exponentially grow your knowledge base by leveraging those that have already spent the time to, spend the 10,000 hours to be an expert. So that's why I think building a strong network is really important and will help you set your knowledge base above the rest, because you're literally leapfrogging, all of this time that people are spending to become experts and just digesting, literally half of their knowledge into a single hour of a coffee. And that's why I think being connected with professionals, taking the opportunity to meet new people is going to be a great way for you to, really set yourself apart when it comes to getting into a role or a career of product marketing or being in product.
Thanks for sharing. On that note, building your network and connecting with people. A lot of times I find that people also connect with others, whether it's other people or brands that resonate with the values that they have or speak about topics or have shared interests. So I wanted to ask you, is there a specific cause or topic or anything else on your mind that you're passionate about and would like to share with our listeners?
One major topic that I would share with everyone listening right now is just recognize that we are in an era of knowledge that is actually kind of too much. And be aware of how much analysis paralysis you're probably indirectly doing, because before the internet, before all of this, we had single sources of truth, and that was going to the library, and that was potentially reading an encyclopedia. And for those that remember, there was things called world books, which were, books like encyclopedias you could have for at home. And there was these single sources of truth. And when there was a single source of truth, what ends up happening is you would end up going a little bit deeper because you didn't really have a choice. You didn't have a choice because you didn't know. And now, because we have so much choice, we don't go very deep. And what ends up happening is we start finding ourselves in what I call, or actually, so not what I call, what is actually a term, is called the illusion of explanatory depth. And I caution you, listeners, that you likely exhibit this. And that is, you will say, oh, yeah, I know that. But there's a big difference between you knowing something and you having detailed mechanistic knowledge of what that actually means. And a great example of that I'll ask you right now, all those that are listening, is, can you really tell me why you trust? And I can almost guarantee you're going to fumble or you're going to oversimplify. And that's because you don't actually know. And the reason why you don't actually know is because likely there's a TikTok or an Instagram video that has supposedly explained it to you in the most simple formats and have skipped it over. And so therefore you think you know it. So we have too much information and we don't dive deeper anymore. And I think that leads to a lot of false knowledge.
Superficial knowledge versus deep knowledge, or the illusion of knowing without really knowing, and the impact of that, because with this sense of ignorance comes also a lot of consequences on micro decisions that we make, but perhaps also macro decisions that may affect our communities, our societies at large. So thank you for sharing that. For those that are interested in learning more about your work and connecting with you, how might they do so?
Yeah, awesome. So if you want to connect with me, I would really recommend just LinkedIn is kind of the main platform I'm on. You can find me at, Nathan Yeung, Yeung on LinkedIn. I think there's a couple other Nathan Youngs, but I think I'm the only big marketing one. And I think also if you ever are running a business or interested, we have different services for different levels, and you can find us at www.findyouraudience.online. Certainly, a lot of my learnings are out there online. A lot of my learnings are on my shorts that I produce on LinkedIn. So if you ever are interested, that's probably where you can find me.
Thanks for sharing. Nathan, this conversation was insightful, wholesome, and fun. And I want to say thank you for sharing your thoughts on the Product People podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm thankful to Nathan Yeung for sharing his insights on crafting an unresistible product pitch. During our conversation, we discussed the process of crafting a product pitch, how to determine its success, the impact of cognitive biases on decision-making, overcoming the fear of selling, building trust in business, and avoiding the illusion of explanatory depth. I found Nathan's insights to be valuable, useful, and authentic, and I hope you did too. I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.